Hi everyone and welcome to Our Land, Our Stories. I'm Sally Lawrence and I'm the lead author of this new series from Nelson Sengage and IATSIS. Thanks for joining us. Viewers are advised that the following webinar contains images and names of people who may have passed away. To start off, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this webinar is being viewed and also produced from today. I'm joining you from Kabi Kabi country up here in Queensland, and so I'd like to pay my respects to the elders of this country, the elders who have passed and those who are emerging. Have you seen this map before? This is the IATSIS map from that shows Indigenous Australia. It's part of this series for Our Land, Our Stories, and you can access it via the internet at this link, or it comes as a part of the pack. So just have a look in the little red, yellow, black book for your copy. It's a great resource and I encourage you to use it at every opportunity that you can in the classroom. So today, I want to take you on a learning journey. We're going to have a look at the big picture about reconciliation. We're going to look at also how Our Land, Our Stories can support you to build reconciliation in your school. So let's take this next step. I want you to pause and reflect for a moment and have a think about what you know about reconciliation. Take the time now to pause this webinar and take that minute to reflect your thoughts, collect your ideas about what you know about reconciliation. I also want you to mind map the different things that you may have done in your school classroom or within your community, that different projects or initiatives that have looked at building reconciliation. So take the moment now to pause this webinar, and I want you, just like in 8 ways, how we create learning maps, I want you to draw a mind map now about what you know about reconciliation. Let's take a couple of minutes. I'll join you in a minute. Welcome back. How did you go? Were you able to record some of your thoughts and also some of the things that you have done in your school environment to date? Let's have a look at what I've been able to jot down. As you can see here, I've created a mind map with reconciliation in the middle. I thought, well, what is the definition of reconciliation? I need to consider that first. And do I know of any organisations or peak bodies that work towards reconciliation? I've not heard about Reconciliation Week. What is the importance of that and the significance of those dates? What's my role? What part do I play within reconciliation? There are also 5 dimensions that the Reconciliation Australia draws our attention to. So we're going to have a look at those today. And we're going to look forward and see what we can do. Everybody's plays a part towards reconciliation. So there's my mind map. And as you're aware, that's very much aligned to that 8 ways pedagogy. So the definition of reconciliation. Let's just take a good look at this now. To reconcile means to restore friendly relations between or to settle a quarrel. And when we apply this to this big concept of reconciliation between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and non-Indigenous Australians, this makes more sense by restoring those relationships between and to settle that quarrel, okay? To make or to show to be compatible and make someone accept a disagreeable or unwelcome thing. So we've considered the historical elements of the invasion of Australia, and we can see that reconciliation works towards repairing those relationships from 250 years ago up until this point. And you can see there it's also about making one account consistent with another, especially by allowing the transaction begun but not yet completed. So that definition of reconciliation, or to reconcile, when we're talking about our First Nations people, is very real. So for this year, in 2020, the theme for reconciliation is that we are in this together, okay? And it's 20 years, this year marks 20 years since the start of that reconciliation process. You'll see the dates for Reconciliation Week are the 27th of May to the 3rd of June, and we're going to have a look at the significance of those dates. But I encourage you to go to the Reconciliation website where you can see the address there. There's lots of resources and information, graphics that will support you in the classroom to embed reconciliation within your teaching and learning. Let's have a look at those dates now. The significance of the dates for Reconciliation Week are the 27th of May and the 3rd of June. Now, these are the bookends for the week. What is the significance of the 27th of May? And you can see here in the graphic that it was about the 1967 referendum, and that's the start of Reconciliation Week. The end of Reconciliation Week is celebrated with Mabo Judgment. Okay, and you can see that historic photo here with not only Mabo, Koiki Mabo and Annie Benita Mabo there, but the other plaintiffs from Murray Island as well that led that case. You can see some links that I've put there below these pictures. That draws you to the IATSIS website where there is an extensive collection and exhibition about the significance of these events. So I encourage you to use that IATSIS website as well for additional resources to support you in either building your own knowledge or adding that to the work that you're sharing with your students. Now, we're going to be using today our Land, Our Stories, and in particular the upper primary components of this whole series. So there is the lower primary, the middle primary and the upper primary. And you'll see the beautiful resources that are here behind me, the 3 big books that we're using. In particular today we're going to use the Country Place Big Book. And there are other components to this part of the series. You can see the little red, yellow, black book from our IATSIS, and I strongly encourage any educators to use this as your opportunity to refresh your knowledge, or it may be those first steps that you're taking. This is the 101 stuff that we didn't learn at school, is in this beautiful book, and it's in its 4th edition, and it's been written by Uncle Bruce Pascoe for IATSIS. Within that little red, yellow, black book, remember you've got that map of Indigenous Australia as well that comes with this series. You can see the beautiful box that's behind me that houses all of the learning cards that comes with the upper primary. And you know that you get 6 copies of each card, so you can do small group learning with that resource. We're going to be using one of those cards today, and I'll introduce that in a moment. Let's take a look. If I turn to pages 22 to 28 in the Big Book Country Place for upper primary, can access information about the 1967 referendum. The key point there was about changing the wording within the Constitution so that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people would be counted in the census. We need to be mindful, that was 1967. In the year of 2020, how far have we come in regards to the rights of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as seen in our Constitution? We'll pick up on that point later. But there you can see that information, there's some additional QR codes for links that will lead you again to more information that will enhance and give you more of a holistic perspective when you're sharing this information with your students. The Mabo Judgment, which bookends Reconciliation Week, it argued that Terra Nullius was wrong. Okay, and it recognised that there was a continuous connection and care and sense of belonging to the country under their own laws and customs, and we know that was Marlowe's law. So I encourage you, there's some other cards in this series that will give you that information about Koiki Mabo and about the Mabo decision. But here on this page you can see that information will support you to have that conversation with the students in your class. There are peak bodies and organisations, and we've talked about Reconciliation Australia. Also on their website, it will lead you to the platform where you can look at reconciliation action plans, and that's called Nara Gunner Wally. I encourage you to look at that as a school, and we'll do that as one of the activities at the end here, where you can start to develop your own reconciliation action plans about what you and your school community will do to build reconciliation. Another organisation is a non-political group called ANTAR, and you may remember them from over 20 years ago. ANTAR stands for Australians for Native Title and Reconciliation, and they are a grassroots community organisation that has their own state and local organisations that lead different campaigns and awareness projects relating to Australians for Native Title and Reconciliation. So I encourage you to look up any of your local chapters, and also those bodies, those state bodies from Reconciliation Australia. Find your local state body and get in contact with them. You'll remember ANTAR, they made a significant visual statement there with that sea of hands back in 1997, and have continued to use that to, bring awareness and focus on this journey some 20 odd years later. You remember in the year 2000 where we saw 300,000 people walking over the Sydney Harbour Bridge and, visually contributing and supporting reconciliation. These are the memories that we hold on to, and we need to reflect 20 years later how far have we come as a nation in working towards reconciliation. To date, there has been that acknowledgement of First Nations rights to land and sea through native title processes. We are understanding that past policies and the impact that they are having and they have made on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. We're understanding that a lot better. We're also recognising those frontier conflicts and forced removals and dispersals through different projects that other people have done, like Linda Ryan, with mapping those massacres that have happened around Australia. And we are doing better at celebrating Indigenous success and the contribution of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to Australia's success. And we're seeing these themes present themselves within the Australian curriculum. So we know we have these opportunities to embed that knowledge into the Australian curriculum and into the classrooms as we're teaching. If we look to Reconciliation Australia, who are the peak body for reconciliation, they provide some guidance around what we can be doing. They provide these 5 dimensions of reconciliation that can guide us in our efforts and make sure that what we're doing is aligned to that bigger picture. So let's have a look at them. I like to read this graphic from the bottom up. For me, that makes more sense, but I encourage you to explore and use this representation of the 5 dimensions in the best way that you see possible. So for me, the first step is that historical acceptance. All Australians need to understand and accept the wrongs of the past and the impact of these wrongs. Australia makes amends for the wrongs of the past and ensures that these wrongs are never repeated. For me, in a practical sense, how do I, as a teacher in a classroom, ensure that I am working on this aspect or this dimension of reconciliation is looking at how can I ensure that the perspectives that I'm bringing into the classroom show Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island perspectives. So historically, we have been teaching a whitewashed curriculum. This is our opportunity to decolonise the curriculum, ensure that voices from our First Nations people are heard. That's how I can practically ensure that I am embedding reconciliation into my classroom. To do this, I may engage with cultural awareness training locally through my local community or through other platforms that will take me back and give me that big history. So Crossing Cultures, Hidden Histories is a program that is great for this, and it takes you over 65,000 years, does a big flyover and shows that particular attention to the last 250 years of change. They're practical ways that you can ensure that you are embedding historical acceptance or changing that perspective in your classroom. The second dimension of reconciliation is institutional integrity. So the active support of reconciliation by the nation's political, business and community structures. So this is one within your school. Consider the roles and responsibilities from your leadership team down to, throughout the structure, to your classrooms and your HODs and your HOCs and those people that are charged with responsibility. How can we share this work of reconciliation, to ensure that everybody is doing their part, like what this year, 2020's theme is all about. Everybody's in this together. So how can you share that responsibility within your school structures to ensure that your leadership team, your HODs, your HOCs, your teachers, your grounds people, your teacher aides, everybody is working on reconciliation together? The third dimension of reconciliation is about unity. So all Australian society that values and recognises Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and heritage as a part or as a proud part of a shared identity. And I often hear educators say, when I go to New Zealand and I come out from the airport, Maori culture is celebrated there and then. It's in your face. It's very much in the picture. We want that the same here in Australia. We want to see Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories, cultures, peoples celebrated and as a part of our shared identity, and grow that proud, as a nation together, that's part of our national identity. Race relations is that all Australians understand and value Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander and non-Indigenous cultures, rights and experiences, which result in stronger relationships based on trust and respect and that are free of racism. So ensuring that policies within your school and actions and behaviours, support racism no way, not here. That you are ensuring that support for all different cultures, and you are celebrating the diversity that exists within your school and the cultural backgrounds of the many people who are a part of your school and broader community. The fifth dimension that Reconciliation Australia guides us is around equity and equality. So Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participate equally in a range of life opportunities, and the unique rights of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are recognised and upheld. Again, looking at those policies and actions and behaviours within your school that looks at promoting equality and equity, and having those deep discussions in your classroom with your students about that difference. So we want to have a look today how Our Land, Our Stories can support reconciliation in your classroom. We're going to have a look at the teacher resource book here, and as you can see on the left there, we have the front cover of the teacher resource book and the 3 different big books that come with the upper primary. Today I'm looking specifically at the Country Place Big Book, the orange cover one on the left there, and you have many cards. You've got 15 cards in this upper primary resource that have those 6 copies that you can use for guided reading. So today we're going to pick out the learning card here. This one is called 2 Important Speeches for Reconciliation, and we're going to be focusing on the 1992 Redfern speech by Paul Keating and also the 2008 National Apology by Kevin Rudd. I'm going to read through this card with you, and then we're going to have a look at some of the activities that are in the teacher resource book. Okay, so 2 Important Speeches for Reconciliation, written by Kate Habgood. The time of reconciliation began in the 1990s. Reconciliation means to repair relationships. It's about building relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians, to understand the problems of the past and to repair the pain and losses felt by Indigenous Australians. There are 2 key speeches in Australia's recent history that are considered by many Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians as important for reconciliation: the Redfern speech and the National Apology. And you can see up at the top of that card, you can see that sea of hands that was done by Antar. It was made up of 20,000 plastic hands planted by the public in Barangaroo Reserve. That was in 2016. So the Redfern speech. The Redfern speech was delivered on the 10th of December in 1992 by the Prime Minister Paul Keating, and it was aimed at an Aboriginal audience. There were some important events leading up to this speech, and in 1988 a treaty was discussed and promised by the Prime Minister at the time, Bob Hawke. He didn't keep his promise. Instead, he supported the idea of reconciliation. In 1991, a Royal Commission finished investigating Aboriginal people's deaths while they were in police custody or in jail. It found police and jail staff were often not doing their jobs properly, such as checking on prisoners or getting medical attention quickly. Aboriginal people were more likely to be arrested, charged and jailed for small crimes compared to non-Aboriginal Australians. In the Mabo judgment in June 92, the High Court rejected the idea that the lands of Australia were terra nullius, meaning no one's land. When the British settled in Australia, it ruled that Indigenous people did own the land, and this High Court ruling has allowed Aboriginal communities to apply for land rights on government land, also known as Crown land. The Redfern speech was named after the inner Sydney suburb where it was given. Redfern has a large Aboriginal population and is known for its strong sense of Aboriginal identity, pride, family and community. At the start of the speech, there was chatter in the audience. People began to pay attention as they realised this speech was different from other speeches they had heard. For the first time, a politician was publicly admitting what the British did to Aboriginal peoples. The crowd falling silent to listen to Paul Keating's words has become one of the most important parts of the speech. He said, "The starting point might be to recognise that the problem starts with us, non-Aboriginal Australians. It begins, I think, with an act of reconciliation. Recognition that it was we who did the dispossessing. We took the traditional lands and smashed the traditional way of life. We bought the disease, the alcohol. We committed the murders. We took the children from their mothers. We practiced discrimination and exclusion. And it was our ignorance and our prejudice and our failure to imagine these things being done to us." I've heard recordings and I've seen the visuals of that speech, and it was very stirring. Paul Keating said that non-Aboriginal Australians didn't think about what it would feel like if they were the ones who had lost their land. He suggested that it might help us if we non-Aboriginal Australians imagined ourselves dispossessed of land we had lived on for 50,000 years, and then imagined ourselves told that it had never been ours. Prime Minister Paul Keating said that the unjust treatment of Aboriginal Australians continues to be our failure, the failure of non-Aboriginal Australians, and to remember that Aboriginal peoples have shaped our knowledge of this continent and of ourselves. They have shaped our identity. We should never forget. They have helped build this nation. And if we have a sense of justice as well as common sense, we will forge a new partnership. In the middle there, that you can see there are some thoughts from some Aboriginal people about Paul Keating's speech and some wonderful quotes that we will come back to in the activities. After the Redfern speech, Paul Keating said that he was confident that things would change in the next 10 years. However, while the speech was important and many people admired it, it did not lead to major improvements for Aboriginal people. In 1995, a government investigation began into the wrongdoings of the past. Between 1910 and 1970, all over Australia, the government took Indigenous children from their families and communities and put them in missions or had them adopted by non-Indigenous families. The children who were taken are now known as the Stolen Generations. And I would just want to point out there that we're talking about the Stolen Generations with an S. There was not just one generation. It continues to happen today. So there are many generations of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have been stolen. The results of the investigation were released in the 1997 Bring Them Home report, which included stories of survivors and 54 recommendations. The report asked the government to acknowledge that it had forcibly taken children from their homes, given an official apology that had been discussed with Aboriginal communities, and make reparations. It was also suggested a day of commemoration to hear the stories and understand the pain of the families. The first Sorry Day was held on the 26th of May 1998. In response to the report's recommendations, Prime Minister John Howard argued against giving reparations to Aboriginal Australians. He said that current generations of Australians should not have to pay for acts of earlier generations. He also refused to give an official apology. Over the next few years, there was debate in Australia about whether Australians should think about our history positively or negatively. These debates and John Howard's refusal to apologise caused more people to pressure the government into doing something. And during the year of 2000, hundreds and thousands of Australians attended protests and marches for reconciliation, demanding an apology. The national apology. After Kevin Rudd became Prime Minister, a formal national apology was made in Parliament House in Canberra on the 13th of February 2008. I remember this day. I remember staying home from work in the morning so that I could watch this on the telly. It was moving, extremely moving. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. It was a carefully planned event and many members of the Stolen Generations attended. Crowds watched on the big screens in public spaces and schools around the country as Kevin Rudd said, "To the Stolen Generations, I say the following. As Prime Minister of Australia, I am sorry. On behalf of the Government of Australia, I am sorry. On behalf of the Parliament of Australia, I am sorry." You can see the images down the bottom there, the range of emotions felt by Australia's Indigenous peoples when Kevin Rudd delivered this national apology in Parliament. We're just going to flip over now to the back of the card. Kevin Rudd gave examples in his speech of how children were taken away from their families. He quoted the words of a protector who spoke about the complete disappearance of the black race. You can see that there's some quotes there from many Aboriginal people who have spoken about how little has changed since the national apology. Recently, Reconciliation has focused on changing the Constitution to include Aboriginal people and recognise their contribution to Australia. There have also been ongoing discussions about a treaty that would recognise that Australia was and is Aboriginal land and help bring reconciliation and justice. As we turn to the last page on this learning card, we are able to read about Greg and his story. We're very thankful to the government for allowing us to share this story of Greg's that came out of the Bringing Them Home report. Let's have a read. It's a very sad story. Greg's story is included in the Bring Them Home report. He came from Cape Barren Island in Tasmania. In October 1959, when he was 12, Greg was taken away from his family. I went off to school in the morning and I was sitting in the classroom. There was a knock at the door, which the schoolmaster answered. After a conversation he had with someone at the door, he came to get me. I was physically grabbed by a male person at the door. I was taken to a motorbike and held by the officer and driven to the airstrip and flown off the island. There were actual letters on my file that indicate that my grandmother was so affected by the circumstances of my being removed from the island that she was hospitalised and was fretting, and generally her health went on her. There is a consent form that's on my file that Mum signed. Most people that I've spoken to said that Mum, while she could read her name, could not read or write, and obviously would not have understood the implications of what she was signing. It had been witnessed by the schoolmaster. It was 30 years before I went back to where we used to live as kids. My whole life flashed before me and I just collapsed in the sand and started crying. And when I composed myself as best I could, I just sort of reflected on things. I just wanted to be part of a family that I never had. I just wanted to be with my mum and my grandmother and my brothers and my sisters. Such a deeply moving account of a child being taken away, a child who's part of the stolen generations, taken away and removed at the age of 12. Just going to take a minute to reflect on that. Underneath Greg's story, you can see a glossary of terms that the children, the students in your class can use. And you'll see on the back of this card also a QR code. Okay, and by scanning that QR code, and you do that with a device, if you're using an Apple device, you just simply press the camera button on your phone or on your device, and it will take you straight away to the clip of Kevin Rudd giving that apology to the stolen generations. This is all done to enhance the learning and to enhance the resources that you as an educator have access to support that teaching in the classroom. So the teacher resource book is the aspects of this series that I was heavily involved in, and I built this teacher resource book. I wanted to give teachers confidence. I've worked with many educators over the last 25 years, and they have all shared that they don't feel culturally capable or aren't confident to embed Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island perspectives in the Australian curriculum. So when I created this, I had in mind that I really wanted to support you to overcome any of that anxiety that you may hold, any fears that you may have, as a reflection on your capability and what you've been taught throughout your own education, and that through your pre-service education. So I'm holding your hand here with the teacher resource book. Let's have a look here. It's about building your confidence, building your cultural capability. Okay, there's additional information there that will support you, additional resources that will support you to bring to life the concepts and themes throughout this series. It also scaffolds learning and takes you as the educator, guides you how to build up information with your students using these resources. And it all links to the Australian curriculum so that you can be confident that you're embedding and you're not bolting on additional information. So let's have a look at what the teacher resource has here for this card. As we pointed out, the QR code functionality, you can see up here at the top of the resource, the page that I've shown you here is a QR code. Again, using your device, you would scan over that and it will bring up a PDF document, so here on the left, that relates to the various different questions that are being asked. So for example, on question 4, you can see there that there's an additional source for you to go to, which is the IATSIS map of Australia. For question 6, there's a YouTube clip that I want you to watch, and so forth. So you've got that additional support. You can see the thumbnail picture of that card, the 2 important speeches for reconciliation, and it also gives you more information about the author and a synopsis about the card. It talks here also about the cross-curriculum priority of country and place. So if we go down into the white section, it clearly articulates the learning intention for this card, that students will examine different viewpoints on significant events and speeches in the past that have changed the way Australians view the nation's history. This card also links with other aspects of the series. And you can see that it links to the big book of Country Place, which we've shown you those clips there of that particular pages that relate to this. It also says here to explore the Indigenous Action for Indigenous Rights section in pages 27, 28 of that Country Place big book, and the discussion points and learning activities that support that. It's also encouraged you that after reading the 2 important speeches for reconciliation card teaching notes, that you direct the students to read the card independently and then guide them through the discussion points and learning activities. Teachers that I've met over the years are unsure about certain protocols, so I flagged those at the start. These are the things that if you're going to stuff up, you don't want to do. So particular to this card is that we recognise that this is really sensitive information that we're talking about. And if we're engaging with our local community and asking elders to come in and share their stories, that we work with our students to understand the sensitivity that goes with these stories. I also drew your attention to the fact that there are many generations. It's not just one generation that was stolen, there are many generations, and there continues to be generations today that have been stolen from their families. The discussion points again gives you that broader perspective, gives you that holistic perspective. If there were things that weren't covered by the author of the card, that we draw your attention to these additional aspects. So as you can see, the learning activities, there it's scaffolded to build the student knowledge up to the point where the later activities go into a lot more depth and a lot more information. The activity that I really love here that I've put in here is about engaging the class in a 4-corner debate. And you can see that as as activity 7. And engaging the students around Prime Minister Paul Keating's Redfern speech as being one of the most honest political speeches of its time. You've got that QR code there to support you, and we're going to work with the students here on creating a debate about, how do they view Paul Keating's speech as well as Kevin Rudd's speech, and looking at getting the students into 4 different groups there, and on that continuum of strongly agreeing and disagreeing, or strongly disagreeing. You can see there's an activity there aligned to John Howard. And here you can 4-corner debate that with your students, taking on those different perspectives and actively and physically engaging in a debate in the classroom. There are many activities there that can support you. We'll flick over. This is what I was just talking about, that 4-corner debate, strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree. And you can see the next template down there also helps you to frame any work that you may be doing in your classroom or school around reconciliation, and aligning that to the relationships, the respect and the opportunities that are being created to build and enhance reconciliation. All of the activities are scaffolded through there, and for this card there are 16 activities. You will also see where these alignments are made to the Australian curriculum, and that is clearly articulated for HASS and English for this card. So have a good look at those activities, as again it directs you to the Narragansett platform to build reconciliation action plans for your school, which would involve and engage your local community. And that's the thing about this resource. Even though we are talking about national statements and speeches, such as the ones that Keating and Rudd have given, we always look to localise what we're doing here. So I encourage you to work with your local community always in looking at what aspects of reconciliation are they focused on as a community. So that's the teacher resource book, and as I said, the intent is to support you to feel confident so that you can embed this work, so that you can pick up those learning cards, or you can pick up the big books and you can share that information with your students, but then know what kind of activities are going to bring out the most important aspects of learning aligned to those resources. So let's go back and have a think about the 2020 theme for reconciliation this year is about we are all in this together. That's you in the classroom, that's the principal, the admin teams, the groundskeepers, the teacher aides, the additional support staff in your school. We are all in this together. When I talk with educators, and I talk about the difference between reconciliation and NAIDOC Week. Reconciliation is the week for, well, it should be all year, but it is the chance for non-Indigenous Australians to showcase what you are doing to build reconciliation. It's your turn to put on the party and invite community to be a part of that. NAIDOC is where we go along and we see community celebrating and we learn and we connect. But for reconciliation, this is your opportunity to show what you are doing with your community at your school. So we're all in this together. What else can we do, and what's the role we need to play, is to build those respectful relationships and develop reconciliation action plans for your school. Create opportunities within our school for First Nations peoples to have a sustained involvement and allocate budget for that, okay? Many community members are now have developed businesses where they can come in and do specific work and activities with your students. This is their business. Ensure that you allocate budget to remunerate them fairly. We need to acknowledge First Nations peoples, the land, the sea, the stories and the languages. And if you're wanting to have Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander languages as a part of your school curriculum, you need to work with community on negotiating that. It is up to them whether or not they are wanting to share that with your school and who they choose to have as their representatives sharing that language. Understand that history and past policies, understand that and look at the opportunities, okay, identify those curriculum opportunities you have to decolonise the curriculum and bring Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander First Nations people's stories to the curriculum. And that's what Our Land, Our Stories does. It has over 40 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander authors who have authored this series. These are their stories. So bringing their stories into the Australian curriculum are ways of celebrating that success, celebrating those stories, ensuring that you're localising that content. We have to, as educators, educate and re-educate ourselves. Sometimes we've got to uneducate ourselves of what we've been taught at school because we typically got the whitewash version of history. So ensure that you are accessing and you are, unlearning or relearning the history of Australia. It's up to us. And then we bring that to the Australian curriculum when we're teaching. Build your cultural capability and let Our Land, Our Stories support you in your learning journey. This series is maybe as much about educating yourself so that you're confident to then educate the students in your care. Use this and the little yellow, red, black book as that 101 of building your cultural capability, and always ensure that you're localising, seeking out the stories from your local community to enhance that general information that you have learnt through these resources. So, Our Land, Our Stories, if you want to know more, go to this website or contact your primary sales consultant. They can come out and bring this beautiful resource to your school. There's no pressure to purchase, just simply to have a look at it and have a look at the quality that Nelson Sengage and IATSIS have produced with this landmark series, Our Land, Our Stories. There's nothing like it on the market. It will support you to build that cultural capability so that you are embedding Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island perspectives in the Australian curriculum, and you are able to demonstrate your Australian professional standards for teachers, in particular 1.4 and 2.4. It's an all-rounder, and I encourage you to find out more about Our Land, Our Stories. Thanks for joining me. I'm Sally Lawrence, one of the lead authors for this series. And thanks again. We'll talk to you soon.